Welcome back to Talent Take 5. I'm Andrew Sterling. My guest today spent years as the person companies trusted with their hardest people problems. She's led the HR function at several organizations across tech, biotech, and financial services, and then she became the person in crisis. A string of disruptions, some professional, some personal, some physical, took apart the stability she'd spent a career building, and it forced a question most of us never stop to ask. If my career is who I am, what's left of me when the career ends? Susan Miele has a PhD in human and organizational systems, so she didn't just live through that question, she studied it. And the result is her new book, Paused: Redefining Identity When Our Story No Longer Holds Us. Susan, welcome to the show. Great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So, Susan, you spent your whole career as the person who took care of everyone else's problems, which is so often the case in the HR world. Then you became the one that's had disruption. So, where are you sitting today, and how are you introducing yourself now?
Oh boy. Well, today, I'm working on my current identity as an author and speaker and advocate for menopause in the workplace and identity's impact on high-performing professionals. So I've transitioned from former head of HR to embracing my new identity in this chapter of life.
So, your career, I love this idea of disruption, career breaks, and hitting the pause. So your book is called Paused. Talk to me about how you've thought about these moments in your career and your life when you realized I need to pause.
Yeah, well, the first moment when I really understood how my identity was my professional identity was like the mask that I wore. It was really not only what I did, Andrew, it was who I was. So that was at the 20-year mark in my human resources career, which I won't date myself that much to say how long ago that was. But I was who I was and what I did were the same thing. You know, the rest of my identity, mom, wife, daughter, etc., all was very secondary. My job was primary, and I had worked very hard to get to the C-suite before I was 40 as a chief people officer for a high growth, high change company, which really became my brand in human resources over my career. I largely worked for high growth, high change environments there's a certain skill set underneath the core HR skills that you need to do that. So when I faced my own crisis in terms of it was a health crisis, I didn't really know what it was. It turns out it was early menopause. It was the first time I really had a reckoning with identity. Like most of us live our lives thinking our identity is fixed or built when we're young, and that will carry us through the way that we wrote that story or the way that story was imprinted on us. And when you face as a high achiever, when you face that reckoning, it's disorienting. So I was having cognitive issues. I was really not able to perform my job very effectively, and everything else felt like it was falling apart around me. And I needed to really reckon with that in terms of how could I get it back? What I really learned in the process was I needed to go forward, not backwards. But that took the break. I had to take a break in order to do that. And someone once asked me if I thought the break was an act of bravery. And I would say, absolutely not. It was more like survival. Like I thought, if I don't step out of this path, I'm gonna self-destruct because I just nothing was working. So I took a pause that was early. It was at a time where, people didn't necessarily take career sabbaticals. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that my sanity was slowly slipping away with my performance, with my ability to function. And I didn't expect that pause to last for 7 years, but it did, because when you are so tightly woven, what you do with who you are, it's, as I mentioned, disorienting, but then you're kind of just stuck there. And you're stuck in what I talk about it in the book. It's like a liminal space. You're like, one door is closed and the other door is not open, and you're kind of in that metaphorical hallway where you're like, well, what do I do? How do I find my way? In my case, I spent too long trying to go back. What I really needed to do was rewrite the story and go forward, which is what I eventually did. But it took some, undoing of everything I thought defined me.
I think there's moments throughout your career where we grapple with, and I feel like HR people are really on top of the burnout, especially dealing with, remote workforces and sort of this always on hustle culture. How did you know this was something beyond burnout for you that required you to really step away?
Didn't know. And it was years, and I had to look back. It was like a retrospective look back. When I resigned from that C-level position, I had bought the medical gaslighting that I had seen several doctors. Everyone said I was working too hard. My daughter was small at the time. She was 5. It was the job, it was stress. I bought all that. And I for 10 years or more, if you ask me why I left that job, I would say, well, I was burnt out. It became too much. And then I went through early menopause. I had them as 2 distinct events. And when I looked back after, it was like 10 years later, I looked back and I was like, those were not distinct events. My undiagnosed early menopause was the precipitating event where my cognitive functioning was so impaired that I wasn't able to function, which was easy to categorize as burnout or stress. It was very easy. And that's one of the reasons I first started in this work a couple of years ago, because it's still happening today. I mean, there's a lot more information out there, but it's still only 12% of women go through menopause younger than 45. So it's still a fairly small population. And I had been very successful in this job. I had been in this job for 3 years. And yes, it was a very hard job and it was a high burnout likelihood, but I wanted people to know that, that they don't have to accept that answer, right? You have to advocate for yourself. You have to find out what's really underneath that. But it wasn't easy and it didn't happen overnight. It was, a long journey it took me 7 years to get back to the C-suite. And part of that was all of a sudden I had imposter syndrome. I wasn't that healthy. In between there, I had another personal crisis where we lost our house in a fire. So that kind of was like a second part of my identity that just went away. So it was, it wasn't easy to both decide to pause and then to understand what was going on. And it took a lot of agency, which in the early days I didn't really have. I was sort of in survival.
What's fascinating, we've talked before about menopause, which I think doesn't get talked about enough, and probably more so on the C-level, around the table. But there's a huge cost to not talking about it, especially when you consider that people will likely be working longer, right? And you think about the percentage of the female population that's going to go through this and that will ultimately still continue to work. So how have you been thinking about this talk? Because I know you've been a big advocate for speaking out on this topic. Where are you right now as you advise others to think through this problem that everyone will eventually face if they're working longer into their later career?
So I've been really helping to educate companies on the impact of menopause on their workforce. So nearly 100% of women will go through menopause. It's 50% of your workforce. In 2023, menopause costs $1.8 billion in lost productivity and wages. And that doesn't even count people who step out like I did, who completely take themselves out of the game because for many years in my case, that doesn't even count those lost resources, because that's too hard to quantify as to why people leave. Now, hopefully data will be getting better. So to me, as a HR person who really cared about the impact that we had on the business, that's where I focus. This is not an individual women's health issue. This is a business issue. right? You want to retain your high performing women well past, the average age of menopause is 51. So that means, anytime between 45 and 55 and anywhere in between there. So creating awareness around it and normalizing the conversation like we normalize the mental health conversation in the workplace, right? It's not a scary biological event the way that it's portrayed. It impacts your brain. It impacts all of a women's functioning. So like if we can just make it less icky and more of a business issue like any other business issue that we face or any other inclusion issue, normalizing the conversation, I think is probably first and foremost where I've been spending a lot of energy in terms of the workplace, because the irony is not lost on me, as you said in your introduction. I couldn't even figure out how to help myself as the chief people officer. So I'm sort of wanting to pay that forward and help other women. So I have the business case, and then individually helping women just to realize that what's going on with them is valid and that they should feel comfortable talking about it. They should feel comfortable advocating for themselves. They shouldn't accept the first answer that they get, which is it's probably burnout and stress, and here, take this anti-anxiety or antidepressant medicine and you'll be fine. So there's the business issue and the societal issue. And then there's the individual issue, which is like, if you're feeling this way, listen, don't gaslight yourself and don't let yourself be gaslit by uninformed or unintelligent, not the right set of information that might lead you to be able to continue to be a high performer in your career that, like you want to be.
Was there sort of a performance reset when you were going through some of these moments where you felt like your performance was slipping, and then you realized like, oh, this is probably a big reason why this is happening? You hit pause to take care of yourself, but then when you get back into, I think there is this pull to be productive, to find fulfillment in how you spend your time giving back, right? Like you owe, when you owe it to others, right, to provide a service and help build something that's beyond yourself. Like, how did you figure out your footing to get back to being whatever being a high performer meant post a situation like that?
Well, I think you touched on a couple of important things. I think there's like innately, from an identity theory perspective, we're wired to either be generative and like want to give back and want to continue to develop, or we can find ourselves stagnated and stuck. So I was stagnated and stuck for a little while. And then, I grew up in a lower middle class Boston community, and I knew deep down I had some like reserves that I would eventually find. So I reached deep for my self-reliance, and I tried different things, partly because of the gaslighting that I experienced. I was afraid that success in that C-level job was not really true because of the way I left, because I felt like I didn't leave at the top of my game. I was barely holding it together by a thread. I felt like that wasn't mine. Like I felt like it was maybe luck or opportunity or coincidence. So I was like, maybe I can never go back to the C-suite. Maybe that isn't my path. That's not where I should spend my energy. So for that period of time, once I got healthy enough to go back to work, which was almost a year, I then spent time consulting, which I enjoyed very much. It was 4 years that I spent consulting, and I did some internal organizational development work and a lot of change management. And then I got started my PhD program. It took longer than that time. And then I did some nonprofit work, and I realized all these possibilities were making me feel more confident. And so I was able to take all these pieces of me that I had developed, whereas before I was pretty one-dimensional from a leadership perspective. I worked and I worked. And when I came back to the C-suite, I was much more dimensional. Like it wasn't all performative and achievement oriented. It was like more human, more compassionate for the struggles that people have. And because I had spent time in nonprofit and time in academia and time in consulting, I also was just better. Like I had more to offer.
Now, obviously, when you're going through this, unless you're working for yourself, you're around other people, and especially at your level as a C level, you're around some very hard charging, challenging personalities. So I'd really love to turn the conversation towards some of the folks that might be listening. You're a chief people officer, you're a CHRO, or you're a CEO or a founder. When one of your best performers is quietly going through this rupturing, what are some of those other folks missing? Because so much of this crisis, I think, like impact, there's a downstream effect. So what do you think some of those folks should be more tuned into?
You know, that's a really great question. And I've thought about this a lot, particularly because I think about what I missed as a leader, even with the knowledge that I had. And I think it, in my particular case, right, when my performance started sliding like that, it would have just a conversation would have been helpful, right? But I was so scared. And this is when you're a high achiever and high performer and you're in a top position at a pretty young age, and I'm sure a lot of your audience will identify with that. Do you want to say it out loud that you're worried about your own performance? I mean, everybody could see it. They had a front row seat. But if I admitted it, like then that was it. It was over as far as I was concerned. So I hid it. I didn't really do a very good job hiding it. So think about the extra stress that people are experiencing when they're like, something's going on and it's impacting my performance. And it doesn't have to be menopause or health or anything. It could be a divorce. It could be a sick parent. It could be anything that's happening that's impacting you. And you don't want to talk about it because your whole self is caught up in being out at a high achieving, excellent performer. So it's like this fear-based. So I think, it seems simplistic to say, oh my God, we got to pay attention to what's going on with our people, right? And I think we're probably better at that now than we were then, but not always. And I happen to work, which I often did, on an almost all-male executive team. So if I knew what was going on, would I have talked about it? Probably not. But I would like to think that as a leader, I would now talk about it. Like I would now be able to say, hey, I don't know what's going on. Or reverse, I'm the employee. My boss at the time was the CEO, would be like, he had no tools to say to me, what is going on, Susan? And for me to say, I have no idea what's going on. I obviously need to take a break. I need some help. I need medical leave. We couldn't even have that conversation, right? So I think recognizing in yourself as a high performer, high achiever, what that fear is underneath of like admitting that something is wrong is really hard. So like finding a coach or finding a mentor or someone that can support you. And that's one of the reasons this work is so important to me, because I can support people. They can just call me, they can email me, they can text me, and I can be like, have the conversation. And, oh, by the way, if it really is menopause, have the conversation with your doctor too, and make sure you're getting the right care externally. Although I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't give medical advice, but I think it's pretty simple in terms of like letting go of that, like this fear of having the conversation is going to expose me as an imposter. Another lens on the imposter theory, right? I can't admit. I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners will relate. I could probably count half a dozen examples of when you notice that something's wrong with someone and you're like, what's going on with that person? And you're kind of like, you don't want to catch it, right? It's almost like it's contagious. So you're kind of like, I'm going to stay back
there's like
a little
dark
bit.
Storm cloud over them or something,
Yeah. And it makes me so sad now to think about that. But I think that that's what happens. The person goes insular, internal, doesn't want to have the conversation, and then the people surrounding them are kind of like, okay, well, I'm helping, I'm giving this person space, and really the person's just slowly unraveling. And what really they needed was to be able to lean on you a little bit, or lean on their boss, or lean on the organization and say, gosh, I could really use some help. And I think it seems, like I said, quite simplistic, but it's the identity piece that's driving it. People don't want to admit that they're struggling because maybe they've never struggled before, right? My career was pretty rocket ship from the time I got out of school, and I hadn't really faced many obstacles from a career perspective that I couldn't overcome. And so when the obstacle was me, it was almost impossible to overcome it. Like it was like everywhere I went, there I was, and I was the problem, or so it seemed. So I think that for high achieving folks, it's easy to your instinct is to want to hide it. And then in the organization, your instinct is like, I got a million things going on. So whatever's going on over there, hopefully they're going to get the care and help they need. And I think that those things need to meet, and it's the conversations and the support and the offering up the take a break, take a couple weeks off, go figure out what's going on, like have those conversations. And I it seems simple, but it still doesn't happen enough. But I want to just reiterate a reason. It's the two sides, right? The high achievers don't want to have the conversation. And then the company people already have 1,000 things to do. So if their high achiever is starting to not meet expectations, they're like, oh gosh, hopefully that'll get fixed. Whatever's going on over there, they don't want to talk about it. It'll be okay. So it's kind of it is a two-way street. We have to advocate for ourselves and have agency, and the organization receptivity to that, and being like checking in. And I always say now to people, they're like, oh, it's such a difficult conversation to have. It's menopause. I'm like, it's not any more difficult. You just like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? And like following up and not letting the person like just blow you off or brush you off.
When you started your roles, when you were ascending to the top job, you're a high performer, your job becomes kind of who you are. Do you find that you didn't take enough time off early? Because I find in my work with recruiting and search, people are burned out a lot. I think it's a big reason people end up saying, I need to do something different. I need to go somewhere else. And I try to advocate, take time off early, because I think there's this like, I need to get shot out of a cannon. I need to work. I can't take any time off for the first 6 months, right? I think there's this like there's a like old school thinking that you shouldn't take time off early, and actually say like, no, it's like, say you had a trip planned, like, and I wonder when you were in these moments where you needed to pause, when you think about at the beginning of the process, did you take enough time for yourself early and kind of set a precedent?
No, I didn't. And even worse than that, which I think is also another phenomenon of high performers, we think that the company is not going to stay in business without us. Like the company
Right.
needs us. It's not just I'm so defined by my job, but who I am is what I do. It's like we convince ourselves not only I cannot literally, my team won't survive, that project won't get done. Like we we center ourselves in a way that's unhealthy, and we can't see it. So we keep on the conveyor belt or the treadmill, and we keep going and going until something, right, smacks us, right? We run into something, and we run into it, and it may not be as big as a identity rupture. It may be something much smaller, but do we pay attention to it, or do we overlook it and keep going? So I think it's like that slowing down to say, oh, wow, I am not the center. Like this job it isn't who I am. It's what I do. And at the end of the day, we're all replaceable in a company. And if I take a week off, this company isn't going to go out of business, but you lose yourself in it. When your job is who you are, you really do lose yourself in it. And I've certainly seen enough examples of that beyond me, where you think, oh gosh, this company's not going to survive if I don't keep pushing. And it's like, companies survive long after individuals leave, even the most important ones. Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to make an important point, because I am not from privilege. So for me to take time off of work was like financial crisis. We had to sell our house. Like I don't want people to think like I just took a year off. We had to take our daughter out of private school. We had to move to a different community where we could buy a house that was more affordable. And so I just want to, because I know it's like, I don't want people to think, oh yeah, she just took a year off. Like people
Yeah.
can't do that, right?
Right.
Fundamentally. So I want to be, I don't want to seem like I'm some privileged person. That was just what I decided I could. I couldn't. I had to make a lot of changes, but my health was my priority and my marriage and my daughter. And they became my priority over my job. Everybody says things happen for a reason. And perhaps that was what needed to happen so that I could reprioritize my health and my family. But then when finding my way back and how I wanted to be in the next chapter, when I re-entered the C-suite 7 years later, what had helped me during that time, to more specifically answer your question, was I started doing yoga, which now I still do almost every day. I expanded my horizons into I became more dimensional. I volunteered for a nonprofit in Boston that I stayed with for many, many years, supporting at-risk girls. And I always loved school. So I went back to school. So then work was no longer my center. Work was something that I did. And I still did it well. And I worked hard, but it wasn't all of it. It wasn't all consuming. So I didn't center myself around the job, and I centered myself more broadly. So then when I came back to leading teams, which was, I didn't do that much during that 7 years, I was able, my perspective was I wanted those folks that worked with me to be successful. It was no longer about my individual success and my achievements. It was like, how are we collectively as a team going to be successful? And how can I help each individual person on the team find what they were really good at and move in that direction? So I became a much more focused on developing people versus ambitiously trying to rally the troops to achieve a goal, which had a lot of developmental benefits, but it wasn't the same. They were different messages, right? It's like, what do you want to do, and how can you do it within this context, in this company, on this team? And how do I build more diverse teams that can complement each other, versus a lot of little mini me's running around saying, okay, let's go. There's the hill. Let's charge. We're going to crush that goal. So it was more holistic, if I were to have answered that with one word 5 minutes ago, that's what I would say. It was more holistic. I was more holistic. I approached the work more in balance. And so that I wasn't out of balance all the time, work. And then everybody felt, who was working with me, that they had to be like, work. It was like,
There's a thread
this
of
company's going to be
humility
fine. You can go home. It's 6:00. Bye-bye.
for orient.
Differently now, even from the last chapter, I think a couple things. One is culturally, I think finding, like, really making sure that I was the right fit in terms of who I am today versus who I thought I was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? So it's like, who I am today and what matters to me today needs to fit into the environment so I can feel comfortable and not feel like I'm wearing a mask, right? I can be myself and be successful and be hardworking and still be ambitious. But I think being able to know yourself a little better, know who you are, where you want to go, and how you got there, which are the 3 defining pillars of identity, really help you to think through, what's the right thing for me to do? How do I fit here? And can I be my best self in this environment? It seems really simple, but it's not, because of all the other reasons we talked about, right? The job that I had last before I left corporate is a great example. It was an awesome opportunity. It was a terrible fit for me, Andrew. It was on paper a fantastic opportunity, but it was for someone who was still like in that performative, ambitious, checking the boxes, pushing. And I wasn't that person anymore. So while I could literally do the job, right? I knew how to be a chief people officer and I met my objectives. It was not a comfortable, I felt like I was always wearing something that was slightly too small. like, my
Yeah.
waistband was like, I always felt like a slightly uncomfortable. And I think it's really hard to both know yourself well enough and to know the environment, like what you're signing up for well enough to make sure that that's a really good fit. But I think that that's critical to success. And that's why the identity piece is really important, because if you understand who you are and why you are, like, why was I so ambitious, right? Like, why did I care that much about that in the first place, right? So I had to like unpack some of that to understand that I could let it go. But if you don't unpack it, you don't even know it's there. It's just operating under the surface and driving you forward. And you just think that that's the destination. And so you have to unpack it. And that doesn't mean, in my case, I was kind of forced into this long break because I was fearful of going back to the C-suite. But it could just be, developing more of a mindfulness practice, or doing something outside of your job that gives you life and you're passionate about it, gives you energy I know you have outside interests like your music, right? That you bring. That's not directly related to what you do, but it makes you who you are.
So when people decide that they need to leave, and I see this in my work in recruiting, I think they just want to do anything different. And I think sometimes they rush through interviewing. They don't take time to do due diligence about is the grass really greener there? Is the devil I know better than the devil I don't? So the person that might be in that spot now, that's like, I got to get the hell out of this place. Slow down, right? What should they be asking in an interview if they're really concerned about going to a place that is better for their well-being and their person?
So I'm a big believer in values-based interviewing and values-based sort of cultures. And so I think a lot of it has to do with values alignment, because when you're not aligned, you can feel it. It feels uncomfortable. And so understanding your own values, like I said, understanding who you are and why you are the way you are, right? That's a secondary and very important part of it. It's like one thing to say, oh, I am this way. Taking a minute to say, but why? Because that gives you some information that's going to help you with evaluating the people that you're talking with about the job, right? How is it how is it feeling? Is it feeling like you're putting on a performance? Because if it is, guess what? You're going to be performing every day. You're going to have that mask
Right.
on. And a success likelihood may not be that high. So I think that there's like just that, just doing some reflection on what wasn't working in the environment that you're trying to escape from, assuming that's what we're talking about. And is it going to be better at this place? What is it where that discomfort is coming from? And how do I try to define it within what's going to work for me, right? Because when you can do a job, like you can be a CPO across lots of different industries, but how it feels like from integrity and honesty and curiosity, like what are the things that matter to you, right? Curiosity matters to me a lot. Learning matters to me a lot. I don't want to be micromanaged. I've been doing this work too long, right? That matters to me. Like, how do I define those few things? You obviously can't be a laundry list, and know that without those, my likelihood of success is probably not good. So like key in on those things and spend the time to understand them, because if your identity is out of alignment with your role, you're out of alignment and it will never feel comfortable.
That's great advice and very timely. Tell me a little bit about the book. Certainly, it's a great topic, and it's relevant for everybody because, as I mentioned earlier, like we're all going to be working longer in many cases, and the career trajectory might not always be this linear line. There might be horizontal moves and things like that. But tell us a little bit about the book, how that's going, where people can find it.
Yeah, so you can buy the book anywhere you buy books. Online, Barnes and Noble, independent booksellers, Amazon, so anywhere online. So far it's been pretty well received. I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I think it's supported people in different ways. Some people who have had the health challenges, some people who have had the career challenges, some people who just wanted to simply understand, like, what do I not know about identity generally? And then what do I not know about my own identity? Like, how did I get here? Why am I here? And where am I going? Because that's also an important part, right? You sometimes are in it and you want to know, like, where am I going? So I've been out just talking to folks like you. I have some speaking engagements coming up in the fall just to get out and just help people to see themselves somewhere in the story and hopefully get something useful little nugget that will help them with wherever they're heading in their career or in their life.
I love that you've decided to take the plunge into, putting these thoughts out there that people will value. And I think there's a message that if you are dealing with some of this tension in your career, that there should be some stuff outside of yourself that you do. I think by way of learning, right? I think there's a reason that you opted to go and get your PhD and study, write a book, um, do things for your health, yoga. There's a great HBR article back years ago for how to manage oneself. I think Peter Drucker, and one of the things in that article that I really loved was this idea that your career will end at some point, and if all you ever did was your job, then you have nothing else there's nothing else that's fulfilling outside of that. So I really applaud you in having found things that are fulfilling to you by way of writing and going, spending time with your family and speaking. And so and learning and continuing your education. I think this is really kind of the path that I think from my perspective helps you get through that. And that might be volunteering and stuff like that. So are there any other things that you're doing right now that are worth sharing kind of in that same breath?
No, I think you captured them all. It's like those threads that I developed, that I found, and the possibilities during that 7-year journey. I've kept them all because I did discard lots of things too, right? The ones I kept are the ones we talked about, but I explored teaching Pilates. I didn't love that. I explored like several other things during that journey, being a specialist versus a generalist. I went into OD like as a specialist for a while, and I was like, wow, this is not the impact that I want to have. So I had to kiss a lot of frogs to find the things that were going to stick with me. And I think your point is excellent. They have stuck with me now, 3.5 years after I left my corporate career. And I don't know if I hadn't found those and hadn't broadened my identity and how I think about who I am. I'm not saying I would still be a CPO, but I might be. And I'm not sure that would be good or bad, but I was pretty done with that kind of corporate role. But yeah, if I didn't have anything else, I would have hung on to that. And I certainly see people, my age doing that. They don't know how to retire or rewire. They don't know how to step aside, and because they haven't defined themselves broadly enough. So many of us in our culture, in the Northeast in particular, the work ethic, the culture, and generationally a little bit too, but it's a bit contagious. We define ourselves by our work, right? What's the first question you often ask somebody? What do you do?
So true. It's so true.
Right? We're like, it's so wired into us. Like, so for me, like when I first left, I was like, oh, what do I do? I go to the library and I go to yoga until I, sort of found my way into this writing path. But I had the academics, I had the yoga, I had the nonprofit work, which I still do quite a bit of nonprofit work, volunteering. So I had those as things I could fall back on when I left my job 3.5 years ago, when I felt like it was time to turn over the reins to someone who was a better match for that culture and could drive the company goals the way they needed to be driven. So I know a handful of people that struggle to even think about this next chapter because they are their job. And I'm not judging that. There's absolutely no judgment from me as someone who lived that way for much of her life. It's just, we're going to work longer, we're going to live longer. And I think understanding who you are, where you've been, and where you want to go is like super important work, even if you just do it 5 minutes a day. I'm not suggesting people take up yoga and mindfulness and get a coach or all those things. I mean, even if you just jot down a few thoughts every day of like, what's working for you and what's not. What are you grateful for?
Yeah.
Where do you want to put your effort?
Name it. Naming it is a powerful move. Even just journaling, right? I think that's great advice.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's just like giving yourself a minute to say, I'm not my job. So who am I beyond my job? And how do I nurture those parts of me too? And again, this could be, I mean, this happens to empty nesters. These identity crisis face people. People face them in all different ways, right? It's not just about
Yeah.
job.
I think as a new parent, what an identity change that was for me with, I have two small children. One that's almost 3, the other is still a baby. I found myself saying like it's okay that I miss part of my old life because my where I'm at now is just it's changed. And I think that there's evolutions, and it's especially like it might be work. Maybe it is as the C-level executive, like my life is just materially different than it was when I was fresh out of college or something, right? And I think it's like it's
Right.
okay to kind of miss some of those things, but also recognize that how you move forward. You also don't need to know. We're not fortune tellers. I don't have the magic 8 ball that's like going to tell me exactly the next move I am going to make. And I think there's a little bit of that uncertainty that makes people uncomfortable. So we're kind of like bookended by these two uncomfortable truths of like, you don't know where you're necessarily going, but also too, like I kind of miss some of the past and there's this nostalgia, right? That I kind of get kind of drowned in a bit. It's kind of interesting.
I get it. I often wonder if I hadn't hit this wall, what kind of mom I would have been.
Yeah. And that's a vulnerable question. It's a hard thing. Yeah.
I do. I was so wired to just keep plugging, and like it was deep, from when I was a kid. I started working on a paper route. Like I put myself through college. Like it was deeply wired. And so when I had my daughter, I thought, well, I could just still be that person. I could still be that high performing, high achieving professional. And, on the side, I could parent. Well, we both know parenting doesn't work that way. So if I hadn't, I had
Right.
outsourced as much parenting as I could, and I realized like, if I had, I mean, like I said, I don't know, things happen for a reason. And I think that was a reason that to me, I became a much better parent as well as becoming a much better leader eventually, because I think I just became a much better person. And it wasn't like I was a bad person before. I was just a very narrowly defined person.
I think that's a great way to look at it is just widening the definition of who you are and not just having it be I am my job. I think you even wrote I'm fine is a big lie that a lot of us tell ourselves, right? It's a redefining of yourself.
Yes, and that's what the book is, I hope, helping people, like I said, see a little bit of themselves somewhere. And it doesn't have to be menopause, it doesn't have to be, but we all face these changes. Going from 1 to 2 children is a big change, right? You have probably had to make some
For
changes
sure.
in work, or maybe you haven't and you're trying to do it all, and you're going to keep trying to do it all till the universe says, "Hey, no, you cannot do it all." And hopefully you have the agency to make that decision, and it's not because you crashed and burned, right? So spending a little of time reflecting on these things, I think it seems so simplistic, but it feels so important.
So wonderful. Susan, thank you so much. I think this is the type of conversation that we don't have enough as leaders, folks in the HR space. Like, I think to everyone listening, right? If you're building teams, if you're trying to get the promotion, taking a pause and thinking about how are you defining success? How are you defining, what brings you joy? I mean, these are all really important moments, and sometimes you have to step outside of yourself. So if you definitely pick up Susan's book, you can find it. So all the major sellers, Amazon, and I know you have a website as well, Susan, correct?
I do. Yes. SusanMiele.com.
So we'll link that below in the comments. So please follow Susan on LinkedIn, check out her website, pick up a copy of her book, and excited to continue to see your journey through this thought leadership and speaking. So congratulations on your success with that, Susan. And thank you so much for joining me here on Talent Take 5. Folks, if you liked this episode, please subscribe. You can find it right now on YouTube, Spotify, also on LinkedIn. I drop episodes episodes there as well. So please subscribe if you haven't already. And so appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, I'm your host, Andrew Sterling, and this is Talent Take 5. See you next time.
I'm the one you should be giving your attention to, but instead you're